so much visual beauty and audible beauty. Some jet skis out there in the distance this early in the morning. God bless you all. Oh, there's a little sliver of the moon up there. Over on the left corner there, on the top. See how the moon has a shorter cycle than the sun, so it's always getting closer to the sun as it wanes. The paths will cross again and an eclipse will happen at times. So let's go for a little bit of a stroll. I was thinking maybe just to go back here to catch the reflection on the window, because the cloud format is so rich this morning. So I think we saw as much of the sun as we'll see for a while, because there's still a lot of cloud above it. We might be surprised with a little window now and again. But I think the cloud has beaten us here with the reflection. It's mostly cloud now. Our high point has passed, although here it's interesting. So today there's the thorny theme, thorny theme of the rejection of the prophet. And we have Ezekiel, like even God himself is sending him out. And the closing line is kind of the clincher. And it's saying, you know, they're not going to listen to you. I'm still sending you so that no prophet has been among them. And Ezekiel is a prophet of the time of the exile. All the prophets are basically. And it's such a such a difficult time. The exile is being interpreted by the prophets as a punishment, as a chastisement, as a chastening, as a correction of the people's behavior, as a consequence of their bad actions. And the prophet is not welcome because he's putting his finger in the wound. And so there are very big challenges for the prophet, because imagine you're told, go and straighten out this company. Maybe there's a lot of corruption, maybe there's mismanagement, maybe there's lack of accountability, maybe there's just pure laziness. It's a situation that parents face with children. Maybe imperceptibly they were falling into bad company, the parents didn't notice it. Homework isn't being done, report cards are coming back from school not very satisfactory, and then the parents get alerted and start pondering, and when they intervene, then it's not a welcome intervention. Very little trickle of water here now. Here we used to have our Mississippi flowing river, and there ain't a drop here over ground, so it's still flowing underneath somewhat. I didn't want to wake those campers, so I didn't say much there. This campsite is almost completely subdued now, in contrast to yesterday and the day before. It's chock full of cars. So Ezekiel, it's interesting because the name comes from strength. God strengthens him. God is his strength. God gave him strength. And God sends him out with all his divine strength, and yet he will be rejected by the people. And then Jesus goes to Nazareth, and he's also rejected. And there we see there are different reasons. Sometimes the reasons are given to justify a situation, but there are deeper reasons for the lack of willingness to accept. Sometimes we have very plausible reasons we give to reject God's voice, God's word. And so these reasons are politically correct. They just show this can't be true. There are deeper challenges in God's word, and we find reasons to to stay away, to shield ourselves from the intrusion of God's word in our life, showing up our weakness. And they're saying, well, like, he's just a carpenter, like, what's he thinking he's saying, you know, who's he to tell me? Sometimes happen with siblings or neighbors, like, who's this person to raise a question about my improper behavior? We have a type of a status quo readiness to reject. We resist. The resistance to the prophet, the resistance to the word, the message of God. Oh, that brings us to a good point. What is a prophet? And many times we think that a prophet is somebody who foretells the future. But actually the literal meaning of the word prophet is simply someone who speaks for another, like a spokesperson. So they're speaking, and you also have that word for speaking there hidden inside of euphemism. A good word, a gentle word about something that's maybe a bit rougher. Euphemism. And prophet is the speaking for somebody. So the prophet is really somebody sent by God to speak on his behalf. It doesn't have to be necessarily pronouncing about the future, although there are obviously implications if people are doing bad behavior and there's a warning that this can't sustain itself, it can't be held up, then it's predicting trouble. Also, the prophets gave signs that would be fulfilled at times. In that sense, they were revealing the future. So it's not a wayward aspect of the prophet, but the primary meaning of the word prophet is to speak on behalf of God. Well, why doesn't God come himself and tell me directly? Like, why does he send somebody else to tell me? And why does he send the son of a carpenter? Like, this kid was playing with our kids all his life, and, you know, what's he going to tell me? Isn't it also true that at times a child asks a question or makes a comment to the obvious, and we hear for the first time in clarity, it pinches our conscience? The innocent question of somebody who's new on the scene, and it can stir a hornet's nest, you know. But it can speak the truth, like the fable of the emperor's new clothes. And people have wanted to go along without being stirred and disturbed. These kids over there have some music going on, as you might be able to pick up. I'm not sure how much you're hearing. In a certain sense, then maybe we kind of have demanding expectations that a prophet has to do this and this and this to be acceptable to me. Well, can I accept the person that God sent me to speak to me? I don't like what they're saying. We just turn off that radio station and we listen to a different kind of music, you know. Switch channels. I don't want people raising issues about this problem in society. Yes. I just don't agree. And one of the little problems about, or big problems about party politics is sometimes just because people are wearing the wrong tag or the wrong uniform for my liking, but they might speak truth on certain issues that needs to be spoken to and addressed. Many times also criticism of some of the aspects of life of Christians could fall into that category of being very valid and raising tough questions. Why aren't we behaving better in that area? And there's another excuse people use then to quell the voice of the prophet who is sent, that some of the prophet's behavior isn't up to scratch, or some of his family's behavior isn't up to scratch, or some of his community's behavior isn't up to scratch. It's also one of the big burdens of scandal when people do very bad things, baptize people, ordain people, that take away the credibility of the prophet's voice. I can do my thing, my thing is totally private. Well, no, your selfish indulgence has extraordinary consequences, very destructive consequences of credibility. And then you have the people, like, that were all through the time of Jesus, were testing him. And prophets have to be ready to be tested. St. Paul's reading is very interesting in that today, how he has to undergo so many hardships and sufferings. And he received such an immense revelation from God, understanding of the mysteries of Christ, of the life of Jesus' disciples. And he was given a thorn in the flesh to keep him humble, a suffering. But then he goes on to speak about all the hardships in his work. And I'm wondering, if the resistance that a prophet feels, like Ezekiel, the resistance that Jesus himself felt in Nazareth, in a certain sense, this is good for the prophet, because it keeps the prophet aware of their own pain, the limited effectiveness of their words, of their action. And this keeps them humble. Not that Jesus needed to be kept humble, but it's also interesting to know that in the letter to the Hebrews it says Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. Like Abraham learned obedience through what he suffered, that incredibly long wait for God's action to happen. The request to sacrifice Isaac. The struggle with that ancient practice of worship, of sacrificing the firstborn. And God bringing clarity into his life eventually, with the suffering of that path. The suffering for parents. They want to do the right thing for the children. They want the children to behave in the best way. They want to teach them. And it's not working out. And there are other forces affecting their work. In that sense, we are all called to prophecy. Jesus said, actually, not just to speak, he said, you are the light of the world, and there's plenty of clouds to block out the light, also in our own lives, and you are the salt of the earth. So there's a sting to it, there's an action, it's not just making it visible, but it has a type of an action that changes things. We're salt, we're supposed to change the world. And so then we hurt a lot when we see that the world is not following the path of care for the poor, the downtrodden, when families fall apart. So many evils in our society, and that suffering is part of the suffering of the witness, of the one sent to bring the good news. So instead of just suffering that pain, that can become a process of transformation of ourselves in our mission, sharing in the being the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So let us ponder that and not rebel against it, but say, okay, this is part of being a prophet in the world. This is part of my role in the world, to experience my limitations, the resistance of others. And I will still be ready to be a prophet like Paul. I will still be ready to be a prophet like Ezekiel. I will still do it. I will still go forward. I will still accept the call. I will accept to be sent. I will accept to speak a kind word, to act, to try to reconcile, even when others don't want that. This is all a very sobering message for Sunday morning, isn't it, folks? Sunday is the day of the resurrection, the day of joy, the day of great hope. And we need hope when times are tough. And we see all these gone before us to give us strength to keep on trucking. Not to be afraid. God can strengthen us like he was the strength of Ezekiel. To the very identity of his person, the strength of Paul, Christ himself in Nazareth. Thank you for joining us here at Mount Arbel again this morning, at the foot of Mount Arbel, here at the edge of the lake. This is such a nice spot. God bless you. See you later, alligators.